Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's program. It's a joint offering of the Pacific Northwest Railroad Archive and the Northern Pacific Railway Historical Association. We thank you for watching this program now or in the future. Today, two of our favorite people, Gary Tarbox, and of course, our special favorite, Jack Christensen, will be sharing stories and reminiscences of the North Bend Local, which operated in eastern King County. Now sit back and relax, enjoy today's program, and without further ado, let me introduce Gary and Jack. Thank you.
So, Jack, we're going to talk about the North Bend Local today, and that really includes all the way from Tanner, which is the far end of the Snoqualmie branch, and it ended up, you really had control over shipments into Naval Air Station on the 5th sub, which is a clear around the top end of the lake. But we start, really, this is the depot at Snoqualmie, which is actually the reconstruction of the depot done by the Northwest Railroad Museum, and but is exactly the way it was originally built. This was all done by the Seattle Lakeshore and Eastern back in the 1890s because this was going to be a major route into eastern Washington. And so they put, because of the Snoqualmie Falls, they put a really big depot here because they assumed that this was going to become a tourist attraction. So here's a picture of you with Max King. Tell us a little bit about your working with Max. And
you know, this is probably in the 1950s. My dad got me a job in the roundhouse in 42. I was in high school, and somehow that morphed into becoming a fireman. I was hired a fireman in 44, even though I was already enlisted in the Air Force, but they were, that's how desperate they were. This photo is probably of the mid-50s, 53. We were working the Tacoma Connection, connected with passenger trains to East Auburn, Tacoma, and we had this was on the afternoon job. We were with the engines of 2194. Max is a 1918 fireman, I think, not promoted until 1939. And we worked together for a fair amount of time in those days. A little hand-fired engine and we made 2 trips between Tacoma and East Auburn to connect with the passenger trains.
yeah, so then here's what the job really looks like. The trackage between Woodinville and Tanner is the 12th sub, known as the Snoqualmie branch, and then there's back from Woodinville went to the Naval Air Station at Sand Point. So you'd cover any movements that needed to be made in that area.
Well, actually, Tanner was the end of a spur. It's about 2 miles east of the Snoqualmie depot that we just saw. And I worked as a fireman in the 50s off the extra board. The North Bend Local they generally worked 16 hours, long hours. And of course, the last 8 hours was overtime. And there's 100 miles a day's work. So at 250 miles a day, which would be with 8 hours overtime, or almost 200. We didn't always make that much, but you were only allowed 3,800 miles a month. Spread the work around, 38 days pay. So when you made that much money, you'd have to be off maybe a week. You'd make that in 3 weeks. So they would send up an extra man to fill in for the other week. And that's the time that I could never hold that seniority-wise. It was a high-paying job. So the only recollection I have is going up there to work maybe a week on that run. And at that time, they did sometimes train master would move the job to Woodinville as a terminal, but all that I can remember is it was at North Bend, which is just about 2 miles west. Tanner was a kind of a spur at the end of the line. So the job went to work about 7 o'clock in the morning. I think you went in on Saturday, you went into Auburn, you had Sunday off, and you came out on Mondays to North Bend, but that was included in the assignment. So
that was moving power. You didn't leave the power up there over the weekend then?
Well, they'd bring it in, and of course they had to come in once a month to wash the boiler on the engine. That's required by federal law. So then I don't know if they washed the boiler on Sunday, but they had more than one engine of that class, the little S4 1300s. They were built in 1902, and they were very light and easy on the track on these branch lines, but that was important.
So looking at the 12th sub, we have, you'll see North Bend, Snoqualmie Falls, which is only 9/10 of a mile away from the Snoqualmie Depot, then Falls City, Preston, Issaquah, Monaghan, and then Redmond, and then finally Woodinville to get to that junction. So we're going to look at some of these stops as we go along. Interesting thing about this branch is after you get past Issaquah, it's basically uphill. And the ruling grade on this stretch of land is 1.9% grade. But how does that mainly affect you? Because you're bringing logs down from Tanner's, the main traffic.
Yeah, Tanner was, as you can see, a couple miles east of North Bend. When we went to work in the morning, as I recall, the first thing you would do is take empties up. You take empties from North Bend up to Tanner, and I think the caboose went on the east end so they could flag the crossings and everything, a couple of road crossings. And we would switch Tanner, and then we'd pick up the loads of logs, maybe 15 or 20 loads of logs. And they had different destinations. But we'd bring them down to North Bend, and we'd pick up warehouses at a big mill there. We'd pick up lumber, carloads of lumber. We have photographs of that going in. You went from it was just, I think just west of the depot, there's a spur that crossed the river on a bridge, and then the Weyerhaeuser mill had a couple of tracks that we could pick up on. And we'd get sawdust, hog fuel, and lumber, carloads of lumber. So we'd be leaving Snoqualmie with maybe 25 or 30 cars. So, and the first thing, of course, at North Bend, these were coal burners, so they had an engine watchman that made sure the water level was right in the boiler at night. And he would also, the track at North Bend where we put the engine, there was a spur for a coal car. And apparently the engine watchman had to put enough coal in for us to make it down to the next place, which was Woodinville. So we would leave North Bend. The first time we get down to Snoqualmie, pick up the cars from the Weyerhaeuser mill. We get down to Falls City, there was a water tank there. No water in North Bend, so we'd fill the tender. Northern Pacific had small tenders. And they always said I imagine those S4s, it was only about 8,000 gallons. So we would take water at Falls City, and then we'd come down to the Raging River, which was a low point.
That's
And-
essentially the bridge across
And there was a high trestle over the Raging River. We would generally have to cut our train into 3 parts because those little engines only haul about 800 tons on this 1.9 grade up to Preston. So we would triple the hill, actually. They'd leave the train here, set the brakes, maybe set some handbrakes on top of the air, and we'd triple the hill. And we had 2 brakemen on the job, and generally this is a hand-fired engine, of course, little 1902 10-wheeler. The brakeman would fire 1 cut. Each brakeman, I'd fire 1 cut. It was pretty easy work. It's only 3 miles up to Preston? Yeah. It's about 3 miles up to the top of the hill. And we put it all together. There's a flat spot up here. We have some photographs. So we'd pull up the main line and with the first cut, run around it, come back and get it, shove down the main line again. And we get the 3rd cut, we'd leave it on the main line, the other end of the siding, and go around and double it all together on the main line, and we'd head down to Issaquah. And of course, once we left Preston, it was just coasting, actually. You didn't have to shove much coal.
So here's
The engineer had a challenge of handling the air brakes on that steep grade. This is the layout of North Bend. You can see you had a Y to turn the engine. When we came up the night before, the last thing we'd do was when we put our train away, whatever we had, we'd turn the engine on the Y, put it in on this spur here, and there was a coal track right next to it. And if my memory serves right, the engine watchman had to replenish the coal supply with a wheelbarrow. I don't know exactly how they did it, really. It was kind of a challenge getting enough coal. So this is the layout at North Bend.
So in the morning, you'd back her up to North Bend.
Yeah, we would
timber.
shove up the Tanner with the caboose on the head end, set the empties over to the logging outfit, and then pick up the loads. And like I say, the loads had different destinations. Some went to Tacoma, some went to Kenmore for the dumping in the lake, some went to Everett. So they had to be switched at Woodinville. But we take the whole thing down here. Yeah.
So here's a picture of the North Bend Timber engine house that still existed in '68.
Yeah,
The rails are.
I'm kind of vague on what was up there.
And then here's a shot looking back at the log loads.
Yeah, you can see there's a binder that's ties, little cable ties the log onto the car. This is a good shot. Apparently, this is probably the North Bend local.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so you can see they've got at least 10 or 12 cars here. And like I say, 8 cars was tonnage for those little locomotives, about 8 or 9 cars. So you almost always doubled and sometimes tripled Preston. That was the only hard pull on the whole, and it was relatively short.
So here's a shot of North Bend, aerial shot of North Bend, kind of showing you in '49. It was a fairly good size town because there was quite a bit of timber activity up there. In fact, it's probably grown only doubled in size since then, but in terms of the layout of the land. the main road there is Highway 10
Yeah.
before the freeway went in.
Is this our railroad?
Yes,
I think it is.
right there.
And you can see the Milwaukee over here on the left here. They had a connection. They had a depot. It's out of sight here.
Yeah. And here's the North Bend Depot, which of course no longer exists today. But this is a Seattle Lakeshore and Eastern.
My recollection is it was not in existence when I was up there.
When you were up there, yeah.
In the 50s. My tenure up there as an extra fireman was somewhere in the mid 50s, I think, or maybe early 50s.
So, and here's a picture of the Snoqualmie Depot in '63, and notice that the tower is not there.
Yeah.
So obviously between 44, when we do have a picture, actually I do have a picture of it in 44, the tower was there. In '63, it wasn't there. So the maintenance away crew, or the building and bridges crew, I guess, decided that that was extraneous and wasn't needed. Probably was leaking, the roof was leaking, and they took it off. But fortunately, it was restored by the Northwest Railroad Museum to its original.
Of course, this doesn't have any windows in it, does it?
Well, it's there, but they're boarded up.
They're kind of masked, yeah.
I'm sure that they could easily be broken and have a lot of birds flying. So then here's a good shot of the type of engine that we're being using, the S4 engine. This is going eastbound.
About a half mile east of the depot.
Yeah.
We're looking east. This is a train coming in. It only got a couple of cars. And this is a spur. You see there's a derail here. So cars, by some accident, cars got loose from the mill at Weyerhaeuser. This track went across the road, over a bridge over the Snoqualmie River, and then they had tracks in the mill that were specific for picking up cars for the Northern Pacific. And there's our little 1300 going into the. They're actually going into they're bringing probably empty boxcars for lumber loading. This is a 1370.
Yes.
Yeah, and and now here this is an oil burner. Now you can tell there's no ash pan. You can see the outline of the oil tank. It's been converted to an oil burner here, so in 1955. So when I was up there, it was before 55, because they were coal burners then. And I'm not sure it was the 1370. We had several S4s at Auburn that we used for these.
So then going on down the track from Snoqualmie is Snoqualmie Falls. This depot was built again by the Seattle Lakeshore and Eastern because this was a tourist spot and they wanted to have a building for the tourists to get off the train and look at the falls, which is actually just to the left to the right of the picture.
This is apparently after they took the track up.
No, the track is still there.
Is it?
Well, I mean, today you still go past the building. So here's a picture of a Casey Jones special up on the track, and you'll notice that the snaking through the woods, those are actually bridges that tell us about going over those bridges with.
Well, they had several trestles there. There was a curved trestle right above the falls that was stubbed into a rock cliff, and it would snap and crackle when you went over it.
Speed limit
I remember in the diesel era.
About 5 miles an hour.
I think it had a 5 mile an hour speed on it. And you always wondered if the thing was going to hold up, because it was a long way down to the Snoqualmie River, because you were above the falls were beyond there, so you were looking right down at the lower end.
And then, and here's a picture of the bridges.
Of it. You could see how it stubbed into a steep rocky hill.
And if I remember, there's cables actually attaching it to the,
Yeah,
to
it
the
was
cliff.
kind of a, I wouldn't call it Mickey Mouse, but it was a kind of a dicey thing to go over. You could see a good picture from Ripley, but taken, you can see they just had a few empties. Obviously, lumber cars going up to the mill.
And here's a picture of the Falls City Depot. Again, it's just the same plan as the North Bend Depot. Again, Seattle Lakeshore and Eastern.
That was one of the two places you could get water on this branch line. So we always took water at Falls City.
And next, we're at the Raging River Bridge, which was pretty high up.
Oh yeah. Well, this is this train's headed eastbound. When we had a triple or double Preston, we'd leave the train. There's kind of a level spot here. Of course, the caboose had conductors in the caboose. They had both air and hand brakes. And when we take the first cut up, like I say, it was only 3 miles to Preston, so it didn't take very long. Probably an hour and a half, we'd be up, have the whole train at Preston.
So here we are, really at Preston,
Yeah.
coming we're off the steep hill, and we're rounding the big curve.
This looks obvious like they're taking empties up to pretty bad. I bet this is taken from the caboose. Probably in the, this is a diesel age. Well, it could be steam powered. There's a lot of empties there though.
And then, of course, Highway 10, actually off to the side of Highway 10 was the track.
Yeah, this is 1372. And
Look at that, look at the number of loads that he had there. So he's...
Oh yeah, you can see there's what, almost 20, almost 20 cars of logs, and this is the Weyerhaeuser stuff. So this would be a very likely a triple train. And we're on the downhill now, and this grade varied. There's some 1.9, and there's some that's not quite that steep. But the old Highway 10, of course, was right next to it. I can't tell from that.
So this is actually going the other direction, but with another train.
These are very low, almost certainly empties here.
Yeah, headed up the... And then here we are crossing Highway 10 on the high bridge.
Yeah, and it kind of leveled out a little bit here, I think, if you look at the profile, but it was 1.9 on both sides of it. And that's the old Highway 10.
Now, we've ridden bikes up there together. And,
yeah, we did.
On that line. So then, as we come down that hill and turn the corner, we come across the Issaquah Depot, which is still in existence and is now kind of a community center.
Yeah, and here we're looking west now. Here,
yeah,
it's taken from the caboose.
And this is actually looking the other way. Same.
Yeah.
Notice this is sand and brown.
The water tank is about with this straight stretch, about a half a mile away, there's a water tank where you could take water. Then there's a big loop, and that's when you start up the grade.
And here's actually from the other corner of the Issaquah Depot, still in service. So here's what 1372 looks like with a...
Yeah, you can tell it's an oil here now.
This is a return trip up to Tanner with empties. In fact, it goes way back. You'll notice that quite a bit.
That helps me to kind of date my working the North Bend local. See, I got out of I got out of the service pretty fast, and in 1940, late 45, and I would say that I probably worked this between 1945 and 1951. Because 1951, I had leave of absence to take another job for a while. So that kind of dates my participation in the coal burning days it'd be the late 40s.
And here's actually a shot of Casey Jones' special in '56.
Yeah.
Same engine at Issaquah. And then here's another shot of Issaquah at the Darigold plant. Tell us the story about this.
This is in all the last days almost before the abandonment of the branch. And I was working a job out of Everett, Delta Yard, that we worked, we'd go up here 3 days a week, I think, or 2 days a week. And we go up to Conway and Savannah on the Great Northern Line in 3 days a week. And the only reason we came up here, there was no other business on the line. The line was abandoned, I think, beyond Issaquah at that time. And this, we're looking at late 80s? I'm not sure. The only reason we came up here is the Darigold plant was producing butter, government butter for storage. And we'd come up here twice a week to get those cars of butter. They went into storage somewhere in the Middle West. But so we would come up here. That was the only business we had at that time. And they were talking about getting the railroad out of there, then, which they finally did. This was our brakeman, Herbie Rhinesford. And this little guy, he was a local character. Herbie would, when we go into the Darigold plant, they'd have ice cream bars that didn't turn out just right. They'd be in a freezer, but they'd be in a horizontal freezer, and if we could take all we wanted, you know. And Herbie would always get a couple ice cream bars for this little guy. He'd hear us whistling, and he'd be right down there on his bicycle. He's an interesting character. He served it. He always told me, he says, "Jack, anybody ever tell you you're different than other people?" And he volunteered to teach me bridge, which I never did get into that.
You never took up.
Yeah.
So here's the Redmond depot.
Yeah, there's no, I don't know if there's a train order signal. That's where Alma Floberg had her last gig as an operator. She had as much service as I did. She had more, I think.
Oh,
58
she had a lot more
years.
because she was down there in the teens.
58 years. She was an operator when they were still going over the Weston Loop.
Oh, yeah.
Of course, we had a mill here then, big golf course over there. Redmond was a lot smaller and nicer than it is now.
And then we get to Woodinville.
Yeah, Woodinville.
And the interesting thing about Woodinville is the depot is inside of a Y.
Yeah. Here's the line coming up from Renton, the belt line, going up to Sumas. In the background is the line from, if you're coming down off the hill, Maltby Hill, goes around to Seattle, over that way. And this line comes from Seattle. This is heading up to North Bend.
And then there's, of course, this.
And this line here, if you want to go onto the North Bend branch coming out of the yard, well, you could come around here. Or when we would come down on the North Bend local, we would head around up to the yard. We'd switch out the logs because, according to the operator, he was the agent too, would instruct the logs went, I say, 3 different places. So they would be placed on whatever tracks he designated. The train would be put away, so to speak. And if we had work down towards Seattle, we'd go down and do that. And then on the way back, of course, we'd pick up anything for the branch line.
So this line would go back to Seattle, and this is...
Yeah, this is the main line. This is the line from North Bend to down around the lake to Seattle.
Yeah.
And let's see, this track joins it right up here.
So one of the interesting things is they use a passenger car. This is passenger car 602 that was turned into the depot in 1956. Now, there was another car before that. Apparently, somewhere in the early 40s, the actual depot that they had at Woodinville burned and was replaced by a car.
Yeah, the operator, you had to get a clearance here. It's a great place for train crews to have a little hot stove league too. Sit around and tell lies to each other, you know. But these locals, hours were not. You figured they were in the summertime. The North Bend local was kind of a 16-hour traveling picnic. Yeah.
What with the ice cream and Issaquah?
Well, yeah. Well, that was later on, but in the early days, we'd get to put our train away, and if we headed up the branch line to Bothell and Kenmore, because we'd have Kenmore logs to shove onto there was a lake, a dock, a dead jetty at Kenmore where the Tacoma logs were shoved out and dumped into the lake to be hauled to Tacoma. And of course, on the way past from Bothell and Kenmore, there was a Wayne golf course. And we always stopped and shagged golf balls because there were a lot that came over the track there. That was a regular stop on the locals, shag golf balls. And we generally went to Beans, someplace, Kenmore, whatever's handy. Later on in the diesel era, I remember at Kenmore there was one restaurant had a fashion show certain times. We'd go to Beans there. But in the early days, like I say, we would probably go to Beans anywhere.
So here's the engine track at Woodinville.
Yeah, I admit that sometimes, depending on the train master, the North Bend local would tie up at Woodinville instead of North Bend. I don't recall working it, but I could have. But they had a track for the engine, and here's for fuel. Apparently, and the coal had to be kind of manhandled. I don't know if they had any mechanical assistance, but you can see there's a S4 tied up. The depot's behind it down there. We're looking east. This is the line curving around between Bothell going up to the Sumas line. And the water tank is up where this line joins the Sumas. There's the water tank at Woodinville. This was a storage track, and the main line to Bothell, or the line from North Bend to Bothell, was behind here. Apparently, there's a nice.
This is, of course.
This is a diesel era, of course.
Of course, the nicest part about this whole picture is the fact the signal gas sign back there, I think, is
and we're
pretty
looking
classic.
East there towards Seattle. This is the line goes up to North Bend.
And then here's the Bothell as we go on the 5th sub towards Kenmore. Here's the Bothell depot. Again, that is a classic NP design. So it was built sometime after the
I
NP
think
took
we had
over.
an agent at Bothell for a while.
Yes, yeah. And then finally, this is the McMaster's Shingle Company.
Boy, I don't recall that thing at all.
This is old. I mean, we're talking about when the line was first put in the early 1900s. But you can see the line down
Oh, yeah.
there goes out onto the dock. That is essentially the log dump. And when you used it, it was actually coming off this direction, wasn't it?
Yeah. And we would shove out there with our logs, and they could unload, I think, 2 at a time off the end. But we'd have a hold of we always have idlers if we didn't have enough logs. You could watch them. They'd take the binders off. Somehow, once they started prying them, and they knock, there's a little retainers on the bunks that held the logs up. They unfasten those, unloose the binders, and you could lever the logs right off into the lake. Cars would jump around a little bit. But you take 2, and then we'd set them over, and if we had any more, we'd set them out too. But we had idlers. We didn't take the engines out onto the dock, as I recall.
And then you would, if you had merchandise to go in as far down as the Sand Point, you would work on down to there.
We did occasionally have some business. I don't think we delivered anything beyond Naval Air. I think the Seattle switchers took care of the university when the university burned coal. They had a coal. But we did go into Naval Air once in a while. Apparently, aviation parts were shipped by rail sometimes. And one account there that I do recall, when I was on the job, the little 1300, we had a brake pipe failure on the driver brakes. One of the unions cracked, and we had tender brakes, but we didn't have any driver brakes. So we had cars for Naval Air. We went down in there, and these aviation mechanics, they dropped everything they were doing and came out, and they made a new pipe connection, put it all together, and repaired the engines so we could go on. I do remember that. They got quite a kick out of it, repairing this 1902 locomotive. But that going to Naval Air was probably a very seldom thing.
And that concludes our offering. Thank you, Jack.
Well, I hope this is not a figment of my imagination.
Thank you, everyone, for attending today's program, a joint production of the Pacific Northwest Railroad Archive and the Northern Pacific Railway Historical Association. We hope that you've enjoyed Gary Tarbox and Jack Christensen as they've recounted stories of the North Bend local. Again, thanks for your support and interest, and we hope that you enjoyed today's program. Thank you.